So the B-26 was a rather advanced bomber of its time. It had flush rivets, it had powered turrets, and used a relatively new electric Curtiss prop. So there was some issues early on with the aircraft, one of them being that the prop was kind of finicky, and there was times it would go into reverse pitch or out of pitch on takeoff, which would pretty much mean disaster. Losing an engine on takeoff in a hot aircraft like a B-26 was catastrophic. It was also a hot aircraft. It had what was called a high wing loading, which meant it had a very high landing and takeoff speed and what they call a high stall speed, mostly because it had short wings and a short tail so that it could be fast and sleek. But that also meant that there was issues with control and also just the fact that it was easy to stall. It was so problematic that it ended up with several derogatory nicknames. Most of the B-26 units that were going overseas were training at MacDill Air Force Base near Tampa. So there was always the comment about one a day in Tampa Bay because they were often losing them in training incidents. It also had nicknames like, Baltimore Whore because it had no visible means of support. In reference to the fact that it needed bigger wings than it had. Several things kind of fixed this over time. Pilot training was a big one. They trained pilots better in transition school. They made sure that they had time on twin-engined training aircraft instead of just going from single-engine trainers into the B-26. Some of the aircraft had some of the similar flight characteristics that the B-26 had. Another thing was training mechanics better to deal with some of the issues and flight engineers to deal with some of the issues. On top of that, the later versions had longer wings and a taller tail. But one of the big things to kind of get people, the pilots in particular, to feel comfortable about flying the B-26 was when Squee Barnett and Jimmy Doolittle went around America and then various bases overseas flying B-26s, showing that the B-26 could be flown on one engine, that you weren't going to crash if you knew what you were doing. And Squee Barnett would go around these airfields flying on one engine, turning the airplane into the engine that was out, which is like the textbook thing you're not supposed to do with any aircraft, let alone the B-26, and was showing people that it was doable and that the aircraft was not as problematic as people were saying.